think the main difference about relationships work in the Northern Territory compared to the rest of Australia would be related to our population. 30% of our population are Aboriginal, which is a huge demographic and very much more than in any other part of Australia. Those Aboriginal people live on very remote traditional communities, many of them. So there's, I guess the emphasis in Aboriginal community is really about the community, the extended family, the family connections. So a mediation with a family in a remote community can have 10 or 12 people in it sometimes, whereas if it were a mainstream family, it might be more like the couple and the mediator. So that work can be very different. We also have a large called population or migrant population, between 20 and 30%. There's also a very big defence population in the Northern Territory. About 15% of the population is defence and their families, and they have very specific issues when they separate because their social supports are usually not in Darwin. They've come there for a short while, and then if they separate, arranging whether the wife is allowed to take the children away from their home, arranging housing because they have to leave their defence housing quite quickly. So there's a lot of issues particularly for defence families in separation. Also issues for defence families and for fly in fly out workers with young families and women at home on their own and the partner working away. We've got quite a few projects actually working with traumatised children. I think Relationships Australia has always taken a systemic approach largely in working with children and their families, and that's still very important in the work we're doing with children in the Northern Territory. So part of the work with children in chaotic lives, who have chaotic lives, would be to work with the families, providing family support and trying to stabilise their lives somewhat. Also, we do quite a lot of work in trying to calm those children, teach them self-soothing techniques, a lot of somatic work. You know, many of the children we work with are too young for talking therapy, so they're doing drum beat, they're doing sand tray work, bits of yoga, bits of movement, throwing balls, getting them in rhythm. So a lot of work to try and calm their systems down so that they can take part in education and gain from that education when their lives are still chaotic. So youth diversion is a program whereby children who commit a crime, rather than being sent to a youth detention centre, are diverted before court so they don't end up with a criminal record, and they're diverted into a program of restorative justice. So we have this program in Alice Springs. We've had it for about 15 years, I believe, and the children who we work with are between the age of 10 and 17. And they've committed crimes like throwing rocks through shop windows, mostly property offences. And the premise is that they must own up to the crime, take responsibility for the crime. Our caseworkers organise a meeting between the person who the crime was committed against and the victims. The perpetrators of the crime have to hear how it's affected the victims. A responsible adult we try to have involved in that as well, and the police are involved as well. So if that part can go through, then the next step is usually a 10-week program where they have to embark on some sort of a community service or some other way of paying back for the crime. Okay, so some of the biggest challenges in working in remote communities are really the poverty. Now, there's very poor housing. There's probably 22 people in many two-bedroom houses in remote communities. there's very little employment, and there's a breaking down of the social structure. So some communities have had a lot of alcohol, and that hasn't been good for the communities at all. So there's a lot of challenges in those factors, and those are factors of poverty largely, which affect any community. There's also, I think, challenges for us as service providers in getting to those communities, and then the cultural differences as well. So we employ a lot of Aboriginal staff. Around between 20 and 25% of our staff are Aboriginal now, and some of those staff are trained in mediation or social work. Others are working as cultural consultants with our professional staff and guiding them in appropriate ways of working with Aboriginal people. So all of those things, I think, are factors that are challenges. Language is also a challenge. Sometimes we need to use the Aboriginal interpreter service because our clients don't speak English. So yeah, that would be, I think, some of the unique challenges of the Northern Territory.